This computer. All right, so we're going to start with range of motion. This lecture is not as long as the other two, which I have kind of set for today, which are aerobic conditioning and resistive exercises, because with range of motion, there's kind of a limited, it's range of motion. There's not much to go with it. What do you guys know about range of motion so far? What is, if I say range of motion, what do you think of? What are some words that come to mind? Measure by Goni, how much a joint should move, good. Right, moving. So is range of motion, let's go back to the other lecture we had, is range of motion the measurement of arthrokinematics or osteokinematics? Do you remember that from the lecture? Okay, so I've got an arthro. Do I see any osteos? Technically, it's a little bit of both, right? Typically, when we talk arthro, again, we're more talking the joint capsule. So that's the main thing. So we are measuring the joint capsule's movement, but when we think true range of motion, we're really more saying the osteum, the movement of the bones, right? When I'm talking about shoulder flexion, I'm talking about the movement of the humerus, my clavicle, my scapula, kind of. So it's a little bit of both, right? Because we do have that joint capsule going in there. So good. What are our types of range of motions? There are three main types. Aeron, Aeron, are you here? And P-ROM, good. All right, so you guys do know. See, you guys know this lecture already, I'm telling you. So it is the most basic technique we do in physical therapy. And in that it's a basic technique, because it can be, a range of motion can be taught to a lay person. What is a lay person? Sometimes I mention that, and I thought about it the other day. I'm like, I wonder if they understand when I say what lay terminology and what a lay person is, if you understand what I mean when I say that. What is a lay person or lay terminology? What does that mean? Does it mean somebody laying down because they're technically lying down? What does that mean when I say lay person? Yeah, somebody who doesn't understand medical term, right? Somebody that's not in our profession. It sometimes can be really refreshing when you work with a patient and they're in the medical field, because you're like, oh God, I don't have to dumb this down for you. And then you don't dumb it down for them and you realize you should have dumbed it down for them. But yeah, so somebody that's not in the medical field, right? So you can teach, like say you have a patient that's comatose and they have a family member, you can teach them range of motion, how to move the patient around. That's where it gets a little hinky, because some insurances may not fully cover passive range of motion. Even though it is a skilled service, they see because you can teach anyone to do it, it's not a skilled service. I don't agree with that. I would hope that none here would agree with that, but because there's a lot that goes into range of motion and functional range of motion. Functional excursion. Functional excursion is the amount of that joint being able to move in order to do normal day-to-day activities, right? So for me, again, I like to use shoulder because it's really easy to see. There are different functional excursions for the shoulder. There's functional excursions for me to wash my hair, or, well, yeah. There's functional excursions for me to eat. There's functional excursions for me to clean up after defecation. There's functional excursions for me to tie my shoes. There are a bunch of different functional excursions that we actually have in just one single joint, right? Oh, here's active and passive insufficiency again. What is active insufficiency again? What did I say about that? Active insufficiency is what? Active insufficiency is what our brains are in this morning. Is active it can't contract anymore, or is active it can't lengthen anymore? Okay, can't contract anymore. Good. Then that means passive is it can't lengthen anymore, right? When you are actively moving the muscle, you get into active insufficiency. So again, we're going to look at my bicep here. What are the motions what does the motions do the bicep do? What's its actions? What are the biceps actions from your anatomy? Flexion, okay, what flexion? I like flexion. Flexion of the what first? Remember, you got to specify the joint. Flexion of the elbow joint, good. What else does it do? It has two other motions, right? Okay, supination, so coming palm up, and then one more motion. It has another flexion. Yeah, weak shoulder flexion, right? Yeah. So it does weak shoulder flexion, strong elbow flexion, strong supination. So in order for me to go into full active insufficiency, I have to go through all those motions. So full active insufficiency, I'd go into supination, I'd go into elbow flexion, and I'd go into a little bit of shoulder flexion. And if you try that, you'll find that for whatever reason, your arm kind of gets locked, right? It's not like you have to really struggle to get much of that because that muscle is now kind of really shortened. So that means to go into passive insufficiency, what do I have to do? Yeah, so I have to lengthen. So what motions would I do at the shoulder? What motions would I do? So I do extension of the shoulder, extension of the elbow, and then what else? So I'm coming back here like this. Pronation, there, right? So everyone do that, like if you got space there, take your arm out to your side, pronate it down, extend the shoulder and extend the elbow, and see if you can feel that bicep stretching. Oh, that feels good. That nice pull in that bicep, right? So that's putting that muscle at its longest point. So let's do one other. So let's do triceps. Let's do the opposite. What are triceps motions? Triceps motions are to do what at the elbow? Extend, okay? Yeah, it can do slight flexion, actually. You're right, in reverse muscle, but we're just to go with the regular. So it does extension. What other area does it extend? So it does one more extension. Extension at the elbow and extension where? At the shoulder. Yeah. So you got a little bit here. Now, it's only one of the heads of the tricep that really has extension at the shoulder, but again, it's there. Doesn't do too much with pronation, supination. It is a stabilizer for that motion, but it doesn't do pronation or supination, right? So to get actively insufficient for that, I've got to come way back here. That means in order to passively insufficient the triceps, I have to come here into elbow flexion and up into shoulder flexion. And it's usually hard for us to get there, right? But if you get up there and you get a nice stretch going on, you can feel that triceps kind of stretching out and get a nice good old stretch there. So that's kind of where you're looking at with active and passive insufficiency. We get some blood flowing today. So we've covered these terms again. Passive is where the patient does nothing. Active is where the patient does everything. And active assist is where something else helps the patient do the motion, but the patient is still actually doing some of it. So we have to understand those terms because that's going to come into play. Let's think about an injury. So I sprained my wrist. You know, I'm out skateboarding and I land and I kind of go palm out and sprain my wrist. Hopefully I don't get a fouche fracture, right? I just get a good old sprain of the wrist. In that acute phase, what do you think which motion do you think is indicated in the acute phase of injury? It's going to be passive, active assist, or active in the acute phase? Passive, right? Yeah. So in that acute phase, we're only going to move it. So like if you see a patient if you're seeing me as a clinician and I sprained my wrist yesterday, you're going to try to avoid me doing too much motion myself, because the more and more I do the motion, the more and more I'm kicking up the inflammation in the joint. And we don't want to kick up the inflammation in the joint. We want to keep that inflammation as low as possible. So we're going to do a lot more passive motion, right? So you're going to put me down on the table, right? And you're going to come through and just do the motions with me. We're going to do a little bit of radial ulnar deviation. And then as we move from that acute phase into subacute, now we're going to start moving into some active assist motions. And then eventually, once we get out of that and we either get into the return to function phase, right, or the chronic phase, we're going to get into active motion. This is a key thing that a lot of clinics make the mistake of doing, because we are so gung-ho to get the patient going, and we may not have as much time for manual therapy, that a patient comes in as a fresh injury and we got them going right away. You know, you come in with a fresh ankle sprain, they've got you over moving on the tilt board, 2 days after your injury. And then what we find is that lengthens our return to function phase, because the body then starts kicking up that inflammation, and it takes a little bit longer to get out of that inflammatory phase. Whereas if we spent maybe 1 or 2 sessions at least, where we do most of the work and we're doing more of a passive activities and maybe a little bit more modalities, we find that in the long run, that's better for the patient, because the patient's had time to come out of that curve of that inflammation and start coming out of it and evening out to go back to normal. And I'm sure that if I ask, how many of you guys that have been techs in the past have seen somebody that comes in with a fresh injury that we've got them, going gung-ho right after that eval? Has anyone seen that? Yeah, okay, good. At least somebody's awake. Thank you. So again, passive range of motion, again, we talked about that it's the acute phase primarily, or, where maybe the PT doesn't want the patient to be doing active stuff, right? So maybe I'm a fresh surgery. Like maybe I have a brand new fresh rotator cuff repair. A lot of times for the first 2 weeks, the doc's going to say no active motion. The only thing we can do is passive, right? So with passive range of motion, do you think we're going to set a goal to increase range of motion with passive range of motion? So is the PT going to say, passive range of motion, let's see, let me get my little draw up here. So PT's, goal, short-term goal number 1, PROM to right shoulder for increase range of motion plus 20 degrees. Do you think you're going to see that as a goal? Well, you might see it as a goal, but why would that be a bad goal? No should be the right answer. We shouldn't see it, but why would that be a bad goal? Why would we say that's a bad goal? That's a bad goal. No. With passive range of motion, are we going to increase range of motion? Too much stress in the joint, good. Yeah, right? With passive, there's no increase. So that's the key thing with passive range of motion, right? So passive range of motion, right? PROM goes from end feel to end feel, right? So you're only going to go from one end of the joint. So if I'm talking my shoulder and we're doing shoulder flexion, we're only going to go to where I have a stoppage to maybe where I have a stoppage from pain. You're not going to go in, because again, the difference between passive range of motion and stretching is passive range of motion goes from end feel to end feel, whereas stretching will go from end feel into tissue stretch. So if I come here and I get to right there and I'm like, ow, 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 you're going to back off a little bit. And that's as far as you're going to go when you're doing passive range of motion. You're not going to try to push me into this, because at that point you're doing stretching and actually kicking up the inflammation. So with passive range of motion, you're only going to go to that end feel and stop. Right? So now if I have full range of motion, great. You'll go full range of motion, stop all the way out there. Fantastic, right? If you hit a kind of a firm end feel, that's where you stop. So passive stops when you hit that end feel, whether it's an empty end feel because of pain or whether it's one of the other end feels, right? It'd be really weird if you're doing passive range of motion on my elbow and you get out here to my bony end feel and you're like, hold on, let me see if I can get you further. Wouldn't work that way. That'd be bad. Now, you'll see sometimes, though, in the clinic, and I'm not sure how we ended up this way, but you will see clinicians that add stretching to passive range of motion. You know, you'll see them like they get out there, then enter range of motion, like, okay, hold on, we're going to go further. Well, that's not really truly passive. You could call it passive range of motion with stretch, but it's not pure passive range of motion anymore. So you're not with PROM, you're not going to gain range of motion. So if you're not going to gain range of motion, what do you think the goal of passive range of motion is? If it's not to gain it, it's to what? Yeah, maintain it, right? It's to keep it. That's kind of the goal of passive range of motion, is to keep what we have actively. Because here's the deal, like my shoulder again. I just had a rotator cuff. I didn't have a rotator cuff, but I had one, I'm just going to say. If this is all the flexion I've got, great. If we don't do any motion on this shoulder, what's going to happen to my range of motion? Yeah, I'm going to lose it, and then we're stuck, right? So the other thing passive range of motion does is it lubricates the joints, right? Again, think of when I say this, motion is lotion. The more you move, you know, the better you feel. So eat your moves with every meal. You want to move a little bit, right? Even passively, it keeps that joint kind of lubricated. In those synovial joints, it keeps the stuff from getting kind of thick and viscous. It keeps the bursas happy. So all of that is good. It also has a slight pain relief, right? So, and the main thing that it does with pain relief with passive range of motion is it does a little bit of gait control. Oh God, not pain control theories, Mr. McKeever. Why? It's too early. It's only 9:12. I know. Too bad. So what were your two pain control theories again? Right. Oh, I just said one. We have gait control. And then what's the other one? Noxious. Good. Noxious stimuli or opiate release. And we don't want to kick up opiate release in that acute phase because that would just make inflammation worse. So just moving it around a little bit does do some pain relief. So active assist, now we're starting to get out of that acute phase and get into that subacute phase. Now we are going to have them help with us, right? So we're going to be moving them around in active assist and we're going to have them do it. And we're kind of gauge how much assistance the patient gives based upon what we're feeling, right? And you're going to see these terms quite frequently, not only in my class, but in Dr. Sokel's class as well. So have you seen those terms before? Right? So we're going to gauge in active assist, right? We're going to gauge how much assistance we give based upon this. And this is where we get into this, well, this book says this percentage versus this book says this percentage. This is the fun time. When you're looking at these assistance levels, always remember assistance levels are based upon patient activity, not yours. So assistance levels always based upon patient activity, not yours. So when I say that a patient is a min assist, they are doing most of the work. I'm only minimally assisting them. When I say they're mod assist, we're doing about half and half, right? And when we're doing max, that's when we're at, I'm doing most of the work. And when I'm dependent, patient's not doing anything anyway. That wouldn't be part of active assist. Does anyone know the approximate percentage for these? Does anyone have a guess for min assist? How much work is the patient doing? What do you think? So remember, min assist is how much the patient's doing. Good, you're getting closer with the 90, right? So typically you're going to see min assist is the patient is doing 75% or more, right? So this is where, and this is an important thing for your board questions. This is where it gets tricky, because you need to read your board question very thoroughly when they're asking you questions about assistance levels. If you get a question about assistance levels with your boards or on my tests, the first thing I want you to do is stop and scribble down whether it's from your perspective or the patient's perspective. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. If I'm saying I'm doing active assist, minimally assisting them, right? If I say I'm doing active assistance, I can word the question two different ways. I can word it that I am doing 10% of the work for the patient. Whereas I can also word it that the patient is doing 90% of the work. People get hung up there because they'll see, oh, 90% of the work, the patient's a max assist. When in reality, they're not. Right? So you have to, whenever you see an assistance level question, what I want you to do is go, Mr. McKeever said stop. And then reread the question. And when you see the percentage, figure out if it's from your percentage or from the patient, because your assistance level is going to be from the patient's percentage. So if I said that I am doing 10% of the work, that means the patient is doing 90% of the work. They're a min assist. Does that make sense? It's a really kind of, I'll be honest, these are the mean questions, right? Because if you just go through and you see 10% of the work, you're thinking, oh, the patient's doing nothing, and they're max assist. All right, so mod assist. What do you think about mod assist? Yeah, so normally we think 50. That's the kind of the mid-range, right? But usually what they'll say is the patient is doing anywhere from 25% to 75% of the work. That means max assist is going to be what? Max assist is going to be less than 25% of the work. And then we get down to, you know, our final thing, dependent, the patient's doing no work, right? And again, I'm going to tell you that depending upon the book you read, the number of percentages vary, because some will say max assist is 10% or less. Based on your boards, these are the numbers that your boards are going to be written off of. So min assist, the patient's doing about 75% of the work or more. Mod can somewhere between 25 and 75%. The max is going to be less than 25%. So then that begs the question, what if you're sitting there and you're going, man, I think the patient's doing 75%, but is he doing 75 or is he doing 74% or 73 and a half or, you know, 73 and 2/3? What do you think would be better for your documentation to do at that point? Yeah, go with the greater assistance level. If you're on that borderline where you're like, man, did they do 75 or did they do 74? Did they do 72.1? Go with the greater assistance level because it allows them, that's it. So the insurance, and that's what we're really saying. But what I'm going to say is I'm going to put that better so it doesn't sound that way. So that it allows them room for improvement. Does that make sense? That's a good way to, right? So, you know, you're like, oh man, I don't know if they're a min assist or a mod assist. They're kind of on that borderline. I'm going to document mod assist so that I have room to improve. Right? And that even goes down to where, was it a 20, did they do 25% or did they do 22.1? It's better to document on the side of max assist at that point. Because, yeah, calling insurance companies is no fun. Arguing with them is no fun either. I'm actually signing up to do insurance audits now, so we'll see how that goes with Mr. McKeever. I might pull my hair out. So that means you read, let's go say you're going to see this patient for the first time, and it says, patient is doing you're doing active assist range of motion with max assist. What should you be thinking in your head? How much work are you going to have to do if the patient's a max assist? Yeah, a good bit. Always, and that'd be, Kelly, that's actually a great comment, right? When I see max assist, I'm thinking I'm doing it all. I'm just assuming that I'm doing everything for that patient. Get ready to sweat. Exactly, right? It says moderate assist. Okay, you know, I'm good. I love seeing min assist. I'm like, cold. I can deal with that. And the main reason I want to hit that this is important is I'm going to use, let's see, who can I pick on in the class today? Let's see. I'm going to use, okay, well, fine. We'll use Adrian. Good. Is Adrian's strength level different from my strength level? Yeah, right? He may actually be stronger in some areas than I am. I may be stronger in some areas than him. That's why we don't do the assistance level based on our ability. Because, Renee, maybe Renee is going to follow me tomorrow. If I document from my perspective, I'm like, man, I did nothing. That was a min assist. And I still did most of the work, but because I gauged it on how much work I did, and I thought that patient was easy, and then Renee follows me, she goes, I don't know what he was documenting yesterday, but good God, I'm soaked in sweat from transferring that patient. Right? We've got to base it on the patient's assistance level. So it's important to know that. There are a couple other assistance levels that Dr. Sokel will go over when we get into when she gets into transfers. But I hope that makes sense to you all. Did that kind of give you a guideline at least to go off of? Good. All right. So with active assist range of motion, right, when we get into that active assist, now we're starting to get into the idea where we're going to start gaining some motion. Right? And then when we get to full AROM, that's where we're really going to be working on getting range of motion. But still remember, range of motion is only really going to those end fields. It's not truly stretching. Until you get to stretching, that's when you're going to break those end fields and get a little bit more. Some limitations of AROM, right? I mean, you've got to have functional strength. You have to, right? Let's say you walk in, you're looking at that note chart, and you see that patient says, patient is morbidly obese, 832 pounds. And it says, active assist range of motion, hip flexion. If patient's over 800 pounds and you've got to do active assist hip flexion, are you starting to think, oh boy, yeah, you may need another person, right? So that's the key things you have to think about when you're doing that, right? My legs aren't light. I always find it funny when somebody practices. We're gonna get in where we do PNF later. When I become a patient, usually for the first comp, and somebody picks up my leg, they're like, "Oh my God, this is not insert student's name," right? So that's the thing you have to think of: is not all patients are built the same, and you may have to be thinking about, what do I need for help? Right? Maybe you get an assistive device. Maybe you get a strap to help the patient. There's all kinds of things you can do. But you have to be thinking in your head what you're going to need going into that room, because once you step into that room to treat the patient, you should have everything you need. Because if you don't, you kind of look unprepared. Right? If you're constantly running, oh, I got to go get this. Oh, I got to go get that. Oh, I got to go get this. It doesn't look very professional. Range of motion should not be done when motion is disruptive to the healing process. So if there's any precautions in the early phases of healing, we need to adhere to them. And it should not be done when patient's condition is life-threatening. If you walk in to treat your patient and they're in doing chest compressions because the patient just coded, that's not the time that you come in and go, you know what, I need to get my range of motion of the ankle going. And you just sit in there and start doing passive range of motion on the patient while they're getting chest pumps. Right? And I've actually seen some people do this before, which is sad. I've seen it where the nurse will say, we're really worried about this patient having a stroke. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going in to do some range of motion. Need those minutes, right? Make sure that you're following specific precautions when the patient's condition is critical or severe. That includes when you're going to see them in the ICU, right? You got to make sure that if the patient's got some critical problem going on, you know about it before going in. It may not be the best time to do range of motion. So the PT's job is going to be this part, the examination and evaluation and treatment planning. Their job is to figure out how much you need to do, right? They should be giving you goals on that. And they should also be kind of telling you when to move from active, when to move from passive, when to move to active assist, and when to move into active. So all those goals, that's the good news, is PT deals with all that. We are the ones that are going to implement it, right? So when you're going in to see the patient for range of motion, you're going to tell them what you're going to do, right? So first of all, you got to figure out, what kind of space do I need? Set the space up the way you want it, right? And then tell the patient, let's say we're going in the hospital, and we've got a patient that just had a total hip replace, right? So we go in and tell them, okay, so today, Bob, we're going to be doing some range of motion on that hip. I'm going to be doing all the work, so you don't have to do anything, right? So patients already set, the expectations are set. They're like, okay, good. This is good, right? Then we get the bed set up, right? We're going to bring the bed to an appropriate level where we can move that patient's hip. You'll find that in the clinic, or at least for myself, when I'm working with a patient, I keep everything at about my ASIS level. I try to keep the beds, the tables at about my ASIS level. That puts me in a good position. Now, I will adjust based upon what I'm doing sometimes, bring it up, down a little bit. For the most part, I keep it at ASIS level. It's a good goal to keep you from having to bend way over or to hyperextend to do stuff. If your patient, let's say you're working the patient's hips and they're in the hospital, why might you want to drape them? Hallway traffic, right? Or their roommate, right? Or just so that the nurse out at the nurse's station doesn't get a show, right? Or worse yet, so you don't get one. Because if you're doing hip motion, that gown is going to come way up. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, hello, Franks and Beans, right? So make sure you're draping your patient appropriately, right? If we're doing range of motion on the shoulder and you've got a female, make sure you provide appropriate coverage for the chest so that you're not exposing stuff you don't want to expose. It's always better to over drape than under drape. It just, you just don't want to see things you don't want to see. Position the patient for alignment and stabilization. When you're doing passive range of motion, get them close to you. You'll see when we start getting to the lab, it's really interesting. I always love when we get into the lab and you see Dr. Ovreskin's approach versus my approach, Toga. Yeah. Because Dr. Ovreskin is definitely orthopedic based, whereas I'm neurological based. So it's not that either of us are wrong, but she has a different approach to where she puts her body versus where I put my body. My body is always in contact with the patient. I usually have my hip bumped up against them or something to that effect where they can always feel me, because that way they don't get concerned about falling out of bed. And Dr. Ovreskin is definitely a little bit more aggressive, where she does a lot of stepping and moving, where I do a lot of rotational motion. So you want to position yourself so that you're not tearing yourself up. And then position yourself for proper body mechanics, right? Lifting legs are heavy. Even arms, believe it or not, arms can get heavy depending upon your patient. Or worse yet, what if you have to do passive range of motion to the spine, right? That's a lot of weight to have to lift up to move on the patient. So you've got to be thinking about that type of stuff. Control movement around the joint, right? So here's the thing. If I'm moving the shoulder, what other joints do I have to worry about maintaining control over? So if I'm moving shoulder flexion, what other joints do I have to worry about controlling? The elbow, good. What other ones? Neck, maybe, good, right? The wrist, so my wrist isn't flopping. There goes my wrist flopping all around, right? And even that scapulohumeral joint in the back, you may have to maintain control over. If I've got something like I've got a winging scapula, and we'll talk about what a winging scapula is. But winging scapula is one. Did Dr. Johnson talk about a winging scapula to you guys? Just curious, right? It's where that bottom part of that inferior angle of the scapula kind of lifts up off the body, right? It can be, I've got some great pictures from one of my patients that was a quarterback back in Pennsylvania, and he has the worst scapular winging. Literally, when he throws the ball, his scapula lifted 90 degrees off his back. He literally looked like he had angel wings on the back of his back. So quick question, it's not related to this, but quick question. What muscle keeps the scapula from winging? This is going back to your anatomy. What's the main muscle to keep your scapula from winging? There we go. Emily's got it. Serratus anterior. And also pec minor a little bit, right? So serratus, how do you exercise? Put your arm out like this, push forward and fully protract that shoulder or that scapula. That's exercising that serratus anterior, right? You can do that with push-ups. When you get up to the top of the push-up to fully force forward, right? Scap punches are often called, right? But yeah, so you want to make sure that you're monitoring all of those joints. If I'm a stroke and you're doing passive range of motion with that shoulder for me, you got to remember the rest of my joints are probably flaccid. So if you're not moving my elbow, every time you're moving me or controlling my elbow, my arm's kind of doing this. You got to control all those areas. Support those areas, support structural integrity, which is what I just covered. Move the segment through the pain-free range to the point of resistance. With range of motion activities, there should never be a hold. So if I'm doing passive range of motion to the right shoulder for shoulder flexion, I should have sets and reps. There should be no hold because holding indicates stretching. Does that make sense? A hold indicates a stretch, whereas sets and rep are just doing it, right? You should maintain a nice smooth rhythm and not go, okay, we're gonna hold 15 seconds and then back down. At that point, you're truly stretching the joint. You don't want that. When we're doing passive range of motion, it's literally just back and forth, back and forth. Nice, smooth motion, right? So think about the patient that might be at the pulleys, right? And they're working at the pulleys, pulling up and down. If they're doing true range of motion, there shouldn't be one of these where they're like, oh, yeah, that feels good. Oh, good. Okay. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's a good spot there. Oh, yeah. Right? They need to be just constantly moving it up and down, getting that motion as lotion going. And then reps are determined by the plan of care. It just depends on what we're going for. Most clinics that you're in, you're going to see the same number of sets and reps. Almost all the time, you'll see 3 by 10. How many of you guys have seen that at a clinic before? 3 sets, 10 reps. Yep. Why do we do 3 sets of 10 reps? No one knows. It became ingrained in our skin at some point, and we just always do it, right? 3 sets, 10 reps, right? Well, why can't we do 2 sets of 15 reps? There's nothing that says it, right? It's easy to remember, exactly. But when you're working with a patient, let's say you're doing active assist range of motion, so they're doing some of the work. 3 sets of 10 allows them a little bit more rest than 2 sets of 15. So think about that when you're working with your patient. When you lessen the sets, but keep the reps the same, you're making it harder for them. So you may not even ever need to increase reps. You may just shorten the number of sets. So there's ways you can progress it. But most times, honestly, we're going to see 3 sets, 10 reps. It's just the way it is. So application of passive range of motion, movement of the segment by the therapist, PTA, or mechanical device. There's no active muscle contraction. The motion only moves through the pain-free range, which we talked about. Active assist, before we're going to have a patient do any activity, what are we going to give the patient? Before we have them move the shoulder actively, what are we going to give them? Well, we're going to give them, yes, we're going to give them STDs, remember? So we're going to show, so show or say, tell, do, right? So let's say I'm going to do, you're going to instruct me in doing shoulder flexion. You're going to walk into the room. You're going to be, yeah, Mr. McKeever. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little bit of shoulder flexion on that right arm. This is what it's going to look like. So you're going to take your arm from your side, keep your thumb straight up in the air, and you're going to go as far up as you can go until you hit the point of resistance, and then you're going to come back down. So up and down. You want to avoid coming out to the side. You want to avoid going at an angle. You're just going to go straight up and straight down, straight up and straight down. Then you're going to get hands-on with that patient. So then you're going to grab my arm and go, this is what it's going to feel like. And you move them passively through the motion so they get the grasp of it. And now I'd like you to do it, right? Now you've shown them, you've told them, and you're having them do it. Make sure the patient understands all of that, because if you just tell them to do shoulder flexion, they're like, okay, shoulder flexion, I got it. I'm doing shoulder flexion. No, that's elbow flexion. They ain't got it. So you got to make sure you're very clear about what you're going to have them. So make sure you give your patients some STDs so they understand what's going on. May need to ask the patient before motion, provide assistance to make sure that they're not, substituting. Let's say I'm doing shoulder flexion and we see substitution. What does substitution mean? What does substitution mean? Substitution is another word for cheating, right? So if I'm doing shoulder flexion, how could I cheat at shoulder flexion? Good. Back, that's another one. Shoulder flexion, right? Or you may see something like this, where they bend the elbow and come up. At that point, they're substituting by using some of their bicep instead of using the anterior delt, right? So there's all kinds of things. So your job then, you see me doing this, your job to come in and go, hold on, wait a minute, something ain't right. Let's fix you. And then you're going to come in and you're going to hold me down, right? Keep me from moving my trunk. Okay, good. Do you see what you're doing now? Good. Now you're getting it. So you want to make sure that you accommodate for any weakness, keep nice smooth motion going, and make sure they're still moving in that pain-free range. We don't want to stretch them yet. When we get into stretching, we'll stretch. But right now, we're not stretching them. So there's range of motion for all joints. This would be normally where we would do a little bit of a lab on this, but obviously we're not doing a lab today, so we'll get into that. Self-assisted or active assist range, right? There's all kinds of things we can use. There's a wand or a T-bar that they can use, which is nothing more than a cane, right? They can use that to lift up over their head. They can do wall climbing, right? So I can come here, you can't really see, but I can walk my fingers up the wall to help me go to move that shoulder, right? You can even do it with the foot if you want. It's a little more difficult and requires a lot more balance. There can be finger ladder. Ball rolling is really common, right? Where they're going to take a ball, come back here, and roll it on the table. Back and forth, back and forth. Overhead pulleys I already talked about, right? Skateboards or powder boards are great, right? You can use a skateboard to move. You can use a skateboard to move the foot out as well with the knee. Powder boards are nothing more than fancy whiteboards that you put talc powder on. That's it. You can buy, like I've got that whiteboard hanging in the wall behind me there. You could buy a powder board like that, and they'll call it a powder board. And it's probably, $60 to $70, whereas that whiteboard, I think I got it off Office Depot for like $10. Reciprocal exercise unit. What's an example of a reciprocal exercise unit that you might encounter at the gym? Okay, bike. That'd be a good one. It's the most basic one. Good. What else? Going on the right theory here. What about one that looks like this? Elliptical. Good. Right? And then there's the old person favorite exercise machine of all time that they all fight over. Does anyone know what the exercise machine that the old people fight over at the clinic is? Have any of you gotten one of these in your clinic that the ill people fight over? UBE maybe. Okay, yeah, UBE is considered really bike. Arm bike could be. What about the new step? Do any of you have a new step in your clinic? Because like in nursing homes, the old people fight over the new step. They literally do. They'll cut you over using the new step, right? The new step is nothing more than an elliptical that you're sitting down for, right? So now instead of being upright, they're sitting down doing the motion. And they do fight over it. They get mad. They will cut somebody over taking up their new step time. They really like those things. I'm all for it because at least they're doing stuff. They love that machine. They truly do. You're right. As long as that machine doesn't interrupt. Well, the giant fan can also be one of the reciprocating bikes as well. But I don't think the new step has a fan on. The new step's just a elliptical where you're literally sitting down. I'll find a picture of it then. But man, whew, they fight over those things. It's funny. I love it. Continuous passive range of motion, or CPM, is passive range of motion performed by a mechanical device. What do you think the most common CPM you're going to see in the hospital is? For what joint? The knee. Yeah. And we're going to do a whole lesson on CPMs, which will not take long, because I'm going to explain to you something really neat. Because we're going to talk about the benefits of a CPM coming up. Guess what the benefits of a CPM are? Long term. Nothing. The CPMs have not been shown to improve patients' range of motion long term. In reality, CPMs are kind of useless. And the main reason why it's kind of useless is because the patient's not doing anything. It may be good for pain control, but all the research says don't use CPMs. So why do you think we still use CPMs? Billable, good. And also we have docs that are old. There are still several surgeons in town that are, 50 plus, and they get stuck in their traditional ways, right? And you present them with evidence showing that the CPMs aren't beneficial, and they're like, hogwash, I've used it for 40 years. I'm going to keep using it. Well, too bad, Jim. Right? It's just, we get stuck in our ways. So what they say, the benefits of CPM are prevent the development of adhesions and contractures, stimulates the healing of tendons, ligaments, enhances the healing of incisions, increased synovial fluid lubrication, prevents degradation effects of immobilization, quicker return to range of motion, decreases post-operative pain. Out of all of those, I would say that it maybe does prevent degrading of motion, and it also helps with pain. But other than that, I don't have good results from CPMs. And most of the time when I have a CPM, I actually end up having bad results from it because the patient, I'll go in to see the patient and they'll be like, I already did my therapy. That machine right over there, that machine, yeah, I did that machine for 2 hours today. 2 hours. Can you believe that nurse left me on that for 2 hours? I don't need therapy today because I did my therapy. It's not therapy. That's just to keep you from breaking down, right? So this gets really kind of confrontational with some patients because they think that's all the therapy they need. And they need to be doing active motion. Ding dong. Are we getting Zoom bombed? It'd be great. Nope. There's somebody rejoining us. All right. So general guidelines. So if you do have to deal with CPMs, and we do have a CPM overview comp that we will do, the device should be only used immediately after surgery. Honestly, if you're going to use a CPM on a patient, it probably should be used for the first 2 weeks and then discontinued at most. The arc of motion is adjustable and determined, but it must be based upon their pain-free range. The duration of the machine is determined. If you have a patient that needs to go on a CPM, the traditional timeline for the CPM is they should be on it twice a day for 3 hours. That's a lot of time. And most patients don't tolerate it. But ideally, if we're going to use CPM, 3 hours is what we need to do. And they should also still be doing physical therapy during the off period. The devices are often portable and battery powered to allow patients to operate and be functional. Patients can rent them and take them home with them. I don't get good results from CPM, but we still use them. A lot of the docs are actually going away from them, which is nice. And then range of motion through functional patterns. Once we get them past passive, active assist, and active, now we get into doing stuff functionally. So maybe you've got a soccer player. And so now you go from just doing, knee extensions to a little bit of ball kicking. Now we're starting to get into more ADLs, right? Maybe some IADLs. It'll help patients realize the purpose and value of their range of motion and helps develop motor patterns. We should always be eventually moving towards functional patterns. If we don't move towards functional patterns, they get bored really quick. All right, so that's it for range of motion. Stop that share and bring up the next one. Hello, Mousy. There you are. That was range of motion. Does anybody need a break? Or are we doing okay? Break, please. Okay, so let's take 15, come back at 10. How's that sound? All right, 15 minutes. I'll see you back here at 10. I'm recording. So now after our break, we're going to move on to the next kind of information. We're going to start talking about aerobic exercise. This is aerobic. What does the term aerobic indicate? Yeah, mainly oxygen being used, right? Yeah, with oxygen, requires oxygen. That's what aerobic means, right? Aerobic anything means use of oxygen. Aerobic oxidation means that oxygen obviously causes the oxidation. Aerobic energy production, use of oxygen, right? So we're going to talk about some terms as we go through here: physical activity, exercise, physical fitness, max O2, endurance, myocardial O2 consumption, all these kind of terms as we go through. You're going to find the difference between conditioning and deconditioning and kind of find out some interesting things about it, hopefully, here. All right. All right. Let's break out the physiology stuff from A&P. Here we go. Did Dr. Johnson cover the energy systems with you? Hint, they're on the screen right now. Did he cover these with you? Like the aerobic, the glycolytic. Okay, good. That just means I have to spend a little bit more time with you guys. That's why I just want to make sure. Some of you may have had this if you've taken an A&P course in other campuses. So with our energy systems, we have 3 primary energy systems, right? So we have 2 of them on the screen. We have our ATP PC. We have our glycolytic, and we have our aerobic. The reason I list them in that order is those are kind of the process by which we go through energy. We'll first of all start off from the ATP PC system, then we'll go into anaerobic like glycolytic, and then we'll go into aerobic. So what that means is to truly do aerobic conditioning, you need to be doing more than just a few seconds of work, right? Just doing one push-up is not going to get you into aerobic conditioning. And when you look at, I know it's sad for you guys, right? When you look at these systems, it talks about their energy use is based upon what they use for energy and how they burn the energy, right? So when we talk about the ATP PC system, right? What is ATP? Did you guys learn about that in anatomy? Yeah, it's the energy. It's the basis of all of our energy, right? Adenosine triphosphate. ATP is stored throughout pretty much all of your cells in your body, right? And then phosphocreatine as well. The ATP system is an anaerobic system, meaning it does not use oxygen. It only operates in that first 30 seconds of exercise conditionally, right? And it's good for short bursts of energy. So what type of activities would the ATP PC system be involved in? Sprints, right? Yeah, and only for the first couple seconds of sprints. Plyometrics, right? Those quick up and down jumps. Maybe a quick cut. You'll use a little bit of that system. Now, most activities you do are going to use a whole combination of all of these systems, right? Because it's very rare that you do something just for 30 seconds. But for that first 30 seconds, primarily all of your energy is coming from your ATP-PC system. Once you kind of exceed that 30-second system or 30-second time frame, now you start moving into the glycolytic system, right? It's still anaerobic, but instead of using just ATP, now we're going to burn some glucose to make some more ATP. And glucose is nothing more than what? Sugar, right? It's one of the simplest sugars we can get. When we take in food, whatever type of food it is, we eventually break it down to glucose. Because glucose we can then convert into ATP and allows us to use it for our cells. The downside to this system is lactic acid is a major byproduct of it. Lasts about 30 to 90 seconds, can be used for moderate intensity, short duration. So when I think of this, I think of those power lifters that are doing some of those really long lifts. They're really using the glycolytic system, right? Or if you do just a handful of reps and you do them really quick, you'll feel that a lot of times because it'll build up lactic acid in those muscles and you get a good bit of, soreness out of it. Massage, right? One of the things, and I know that, like I said, Tyler, I know that he's an LMT. What's one of the things after you get a massage they want you to do? Drink water. Good. Why? What's the reason for that? Yeah, hydrate's one of them. Good. The other thing is flush your system. Yeah, exactly. When you're getting a massage, believe it or not, your body is going into a little bit of glycolytic anaerobic activity. That's why when the massage therapist is working on you, your muscles warm up, right? You can actually feel it a lot of times when they're working you. You'll start feeling those muscles getting a little hot, right? And it's not just because you have an awesome massage therapist right? No, it's because they're actually kind of working those muscles and getting them into that anaerobic system. Well, the downside to that is, and you can do this if you don't drink water afterwards. Go get a really, really deep, Swedish massage or a really deep sports massage, and then don't drink water afterwards and see what you feel like the next day. Yeah, you're gonna be really hurting, and that's because you're gonna have this buildup of lactic. You're gonna have DOMS like crazy. And that's because the lactic acid's built up. That water is kind of help flush all those toxins out, right? Lactic acid is not a toxin in so much as it's going to kill muscles, but it definitely, is a byproduct that's kind of toxic to your body. So it's toxin. So you want to drink some water, right? So it's really key, and we're going to talk about even when we do aerobic exercise, it's really key to hydrate because you want to get out that those lactic acid buildup. But let's think about it. Let's say you're going to run a 5K today. When you start that 5K, you're going to start in the ATP-PC system. You're going to move into the anaerobic glycolytic system. And then eventually you're going to go to the aerobic system. But throughout that whole run, you're going to be vacillating between all three of those systems, right? And when you're vacillating between them, you're still building up lactic acid, which is why it's really good to stretch and drink water after an activity, right? Hydrate. And then the aerobic system is where we start burning more of that glycogen, more of that simple sugar, but we also can then use fats and proteins as our energy system. Yeah, yep. When you get to aerobic, you can't get that runner's high, right? And honestly, the runner's high when you get it is your body entering noxious stimuli. Believe it or not, you didn't think about it, but your body's entering that final pain control theory. And you're getting endogenous opioids flowing through your body. And that's why you kind of get that high. Well, congratulations. I haven't hit that yet today. I encountered the get out of bed high this morning. That's where I'm at so far for the morning. Not quite at the runner's high yet. But yeah, but you think about it, right? 5 cups of coffee. But when you think about it, think logically through this though, because when you hit that runner's high, you've kind of pushed through a lot of crap to get there, right? When you get there, you've pushed through a lot of pain, right? And then when you get there, your body kicks in that endogenous opioids, and that's when you get that feeling of, oh my God, I feel good. Oh, this is great. Well, yeah, you basically just give yourself a kickstart of dopamine. So it's actually pretty cool, right? And that's what, and the aerobic system it's when you vacillate between them. A lot of times it's going to go back to those pre-systems. It's going to give you a burst of sugar really quick, and it kind of gets you that feeling of energy as well. But the aerobic system is going to be your predominant system after 90 seconds. And again, it's going to be using oxygen. And this is why it's kind of important that even when you're working out, you want to have a balanced diet, because you don't want to go, so slim on your calories that you're not taking in food. Because you can see when you enter that aerobic system in your training, your body can burn fat, but it can also burn protein. And that means it can burn muscle, right? So we want to be paying attention. We do provide our bodies with enough fuel to function. All right, types of motor fibers. These are important to understand, right? So we have type 1s, type 2s, and the type 2s are divided into B, A, and X's. I think the next slide has a chart, which makes it really well. So type 1 fibers are your slow aerobic activity fibers, right? They're really resistant to any type of fatigue. Those are our big movers, right? A lot of times when you think of those type 1 fibers, they're really kind of our major big movers. They produce a very low amount of power, but they have a very high mitochondrial density, right? A lot of time when you're looking at these fibers, right, the type 1s, a lot of times you hear are pure red fibers. Have you heard that term before in muscles? Where you had red and white fibers of muscles. Your red fibers are your more oxidative muscles. They're the ones that actually allow you to do more aerobic activity. Yep, pure red because of oxygen, exactly. Right? And that's when that's why if you ever get a chance, I know that, if you're ever like a chef or you get to cook, and you get the difference between like your traditional American beef and you get your Wagyu pure beef that came from Japan, the Wagyu beef has a lot more marbling in it, because a lot of times those cows don't do as much. And if they're really a true Wagyu, the cow doesn't do anything. And that marbling is more of the type 2 fibers, that white fiber muscle, which allows the meat to have a little bit different flavor, right? So even humans have different flavors depending on what muscles you eat. Just saying, I don't speak from experience. But those are your type 1s. Those are the fibers that get you going, right? Your type 2s, on the other hand, are going to be more of your white fibers, but there's type 2As, X's, and B's, right? So when you're looking at these, and we go back up here, right, your type 2Bs are your anaerobic fibers. And a lot of people are going to go, well, how much of this do I need to know for my boards, Mr. McKeever? You do need to know all of this for your boards. They will ask questions about these. And they may not refer them as type 1 or type 2. A lot of times they'll refer them to as slow twitch or fast twitch, right? Your type 2Bs are your primary anaerobic muscles, right? So those are the ones that are your pure white muscles. Those are good for short, powerful bursts. And I'm going to kind of give an explanation as to how this kind of works out for you in a little bit. Your type 2As are a combo fiber. So this is a fiber that is between a type 1 and a type 2B. It does a little bit of aerobic, but it's still a primary anaerobic muscle. And then we have these type 2Xs, which we're really researching right now, which are, we go down to this next chart, they're a fast and moderate muscle, but we don't know much about them at this point. And they're really kind of starting to look, is this a true type fiber, or is this a combination between a type 2B and a type 2A? How does this come into play? All of you in this class have a dominance for your fiber, meaning your muscles are going to be predominantly aerobic or predominantly anaerobic. So you're going to be type 1 dominant or type 2 dominant. And you can actually test for this. So my sister I guess she's engaged now. I saw a post about it. She's engaged to the lead physiatrist for the Philadelphia Eagles. And way back before Mr. McKeever was in physical therapy and I was into powerlifting, it was interesting because I went down and he gave me a tour of the Philadelphia Eagles facility. And when I was there, Ricky Waters was there. And I played football against Ricky Waters way back in the day. Ricky Waters was a running back for the Eagles. I think he went for San Francisco as well. Pure beast of a person. He was just amazingly built. But they have this force plate in their physiatry clinic that helps them determine if the person is more type 1 or type 2 dominant. And it was interesting because I did a test against him, right? And so what they'll have you do is they'll have you get on the force plate, and there's this graph. And what the graph is going to show is they're going to tell you get on the force plate, and for 5 minutes, they want you to jump up and down. Just jump up and down, jump up and down. And what the thing measures is how much time you're in the air versus how much time you're on the plate. And what happens when I did it is the more jumping I did, the longer I spent on the plate. Because I'm type 1 dominant. So I was jumping. I started really good. I got a lot of powerful bursts. I was up in the air for a long time, and I landed, and then I jumped, and I landed, and we got about 30 seconds into it, and I'm like, I'm dying. Stop this now, please. And then he had Ricky Waters do it, and almost for the full time that he's doing it, his chart just stayed even the whole time. It was really amazing. It was really interesting to me back then. It was even more interesting to me now. But he was type 1 dominant. He has a lot more red fibers. I have a lot more white fibers in my body. Why is that important? Well, when you're dealing with elite athletes like that, you can train your body to become those type 2 Bs, right? Can't really train it. What you do is you convert some of your type 2 As to type 2 Bs. You can't really train your body to become that way. You adjust some of your other fibers, right? And you can do that over time, but it's not pure. Your body's still going to be pure one fiber versus the other. But again, why that's important is if you know what your athlete's ability is, then you can develop a very physical program based upon their energy levels, right? And again, I'm big into football, I'm big into martial arts. What that allows us to do with elite athletes is if we've got somebody like an offensive lineman don't necessarily need a ton of aerobic activities. Their job is to go from a 3-point stance into a burst of energy as fast as possible to push the person off the line. They don't need a ton of energy to do that. They need a ton of force to do it. So if we know that which fiber they're dominant, we can develop a program to push them towards one fiber or the other. So you can train slightly. So what you can do is, let's say, like I said, so I'm primarily type 2B dominant, right? What I can do is if I train hard enough, I can convert some of those type 2As or type 2Bs into type 2As, where they're a combination of both. That gives me a little bit more aerobic capability. Doesn't totally fix it, but it gives me more aerobic capability. If you are more of this aerobic activity, there's not much you can do to convert down here and become a power lifter. And you'll see that, right? Have any of you ever watched the strongman competitions? Like where what's his name? The guy that played the mountain competes, right? You watch them, type 1 is red, type 2 is white, yeah. And the type 2As are kind of like marble fibers would be a term for them, I guess. But they're still a white fiber predominantly, right? Those powerlifting competitions, if you put one of those, like if you put the mountain right beside somebody that's a cross-country runner, do they have totally different body types? Yeah, they do, right? even if you put somebody like Erica against me, I'm going to guess if we did a test, I'm going to guess probably, Erica, you have a little bit more of a red fiber to you. And it's because you kind of end up in that ectomorph body type, which is that the slimmer build body type on a good day, right? But you probably have a dominance. And that's just kind of the way that I'm just using you because you were the one who responded here. If you compare that to me, my fibers are definitely going to be more of that quick fiber. I am really good at lots of power really quick. I can, do 5-10 reps of a lot of weight really quick. But then once you get past that, I'm starting to fatigue out. For me, 5K is like running a marathon. I hit that 5K. I don't know what it is. I get past that 5K and I'm dead. So I just don't have that aerobic capability. Whereas, somebody that's a marathon runner, good Lord, those people are crazy. I always ask why, but see, that's exactly right. So we're all dominant there. Just depends upon what we do. It's not a random question. I was actually going to say that, actually. Good comment. So lower extremities, primarily your large, big muscle groups, like your quads and your hamstrings, are going to be more type 1 dominant. And typically, you're right, your type 2s are going to be more upper body because those are going to be doing things that we do for short periods of time. That is an excellent, excellent observation. Does that mean they can't be reversed? No, it does mean they can be reversed. But for predominantly, right, when we do stuff for long periods of time, we're mainly on our legs. Right? Now, what if we went back and let's go back, 50,000 years. And now we go back to like Cro-Magnon man, where we're actually kind of walking on all fours. Do you think that the upper and lower extremities are more balanced probably at that point? Yeah, right. That's what's interesting. Think about that genetic change we went through to walking upright. And that's interesting. Like when because they've done autopsies on like gorillas and apes and monkeys and that, and you look at their muscle fibers versus our muscle fibers, their muscle fibers look amazingly different to ours, right? Similar in structure, but they definitely have a little bit more of that aerobic fiber going on. And you're exactly right, Erica. So a lot of times when you're working on that, you may feel they're faster, but that's only because you're able to burn that aerobic, like that aerobics or anaerobic system faster, right? And a lot of people will say in the martial arts that your feet are stronger than your hands. Well, is it that they're stronger or there's just more weight behind them? Right? Weight has something to do with, we talked about force equals mass times acceleration. There's definitely more mass behind your legs than there are behind your arms. Yep. Fama. So talking about energy expenditure, anytime that we do stuff, we're going to be burning energy, right? We talked about calories before, right? A calorie is what happens when we burn 1 gram of water and increase it by 1 degree Celsius. When we burn those kilocalories, 5 kilocalories equals 1 liter of oxygen consumed. This is where we start talking about, have any of you heard of VO2 maxes before? Right, it's where we're measuring how much oxygen we're able to use, right? What we're really looking at, although we're looking at oxygen, what we're really looking at is how much energy we're burning. Because we need oxygen to burn that energy. So when we work with patients, a lot of times they're going to classify these aerobic activities based upon light, moderate, and heavy activities. A light activity might be having them do something like walk around the clinic. A moderate might be having them jog, whereas a heavy activity definitely will be getting into the running. And then we're looking at that kind of efficiency with our work output and force. Again, power equals doing work over a time period, right? So to build power, right, we either need to increase our work or decrease the amount of time we've done it in. Overall, the more we do, the more power, the more strength, the more endurance we're going to build, but there are ways to key it into getting more of an aerobic build going. So once we start exercising, so let's say we all start getting up right now. You did VO2 max test before? Cool. Those are, no thank you. once we start exercising, let's say we get up and all of us start doing jumping jacks right now. What's going to happen? Well, there's going to be what's called a pressor response. And a pressor response is blood pressure, right? The muscles are going to vasoconstrict muscles not being used and vasodilate muscles being used. So actually, let's not do jumping jacks. Let's say we're going to run, right? So we start running. Well, it's going to start cutting off muscles that we're not using. Like we may not be using our external obliques as much at that given moment. We may be using rectus. We may not be using external obliques as much. So it's going to tone down the blood going to those muscles and kick up the blood going to our legs and vasodilate to allow more blood flow to get to that area. More blood flow gets to the area, more oxygen gets to the area. More oxygen gets to the area, more energy can be consumed, right? What do you think is going to happen to the heart when you start exercising? Some of you feel it, right? What happens when you start exercising harder? It starts pumping faster, right? So your pulse rate initially increases, right? And eventually, if you watch your pulse rate, it'll increase and then it'll plateau, right? And you'll get to a point where your kind of pulse rate is at a normal rate. What happened at that point is your pulse rate picked up, but then your volumetric output of your heart has increased. So that cardiac output actually increased, meaning you're pumping more blood for every pump, right? Peripheral effects, net reduction in total peripheral resistance. So out at your periphery in your arms and your legs, the actual resistance in your cell walls decreases to allow that food, the energy transfer to happen faster and the oxygen transfer to happen. Cardiac output goes up and your systolic blood pressure should go up. Would your diastolic blood pressure go up exercising? What do you think? Would there be any reason? No, it shouldn't really. And that's where we watch for patients that are sick because their diastolic pressure will go up. Remember, diastolic is that resting pressure. That resting pressure doesn't need to change for exercise. What needs to change is that pumping pressure, the systolic. But if you have a patient with an unhealthy heart, a lot of times diastolic will go up before systolic. So they'll go, they may be, say they're 140 over 90 at rest. When they first start exercising, they'll go to like 140 over 120. And we know that they don't have a very healthy circulatory system at that point. We need to watch them because that high of blood pressure on the diastolic side can lead to a backup and a heart failure really quick. So diastolic doesn't go up much, but systolic definitely pumps up, right? Now you're exercising longer and longer. What happens to your breathing? Right? You start increasing your breathing. Not only do you increase your breathing, but you increase the amount of air you're taking in, right? Anyone ever, when you run a lot, after you get done running and you just stop, right? You get those really deep kind of heavy breathing where you're sucking in as much oxygen as you can to recover. So your respiratory response, again, but your respiratory response is going to pick up and then plateau, because then what happens is that peripheral resistance has improved and you don't need as much air in to function. And again, when we breathe in, we're only using about 40% of the oxygen we're breathing in. So even if we just overall improve the resistance, the peripheral resistance to allow that oxygen to transfer faster, even if we just take it up to 50%, we're getting more oxygen to the body. Providing additional oxygen to the blood, increased blood flow to those muscles, oxygen extraction occurs better. Carbon dioxide detraction also occurs better, meaning getting the carbon dioxide out of the muscles improves. And then oxygen consumption is going to be depending upon how many muscles are contracted, what type of muscles are contracted, and how the muscles are constructed. So your legs are going to use more oxygen than your upper body, right? That's just kind of what we talked about. Your legs are definitely going to use more oxygen than your neck. But then when you get down to some of the fine muscles of your hands, they're not going to use as much oxygen. So it depends upon what we're doing. You're never going to get a cardiac exercise out of doing finger squeezes, right? This is not ever going to get you cardiac trained doing finger exercises, right? We must do our exercises. We must. So testing basis for exercise programs, right? Fitness testing, a lot of times of healthy subjects, we look at how to make them more healthy. So a lot of times, though, here's the main deal. We are not going to be dealing with healthy patients. So you can't compare your patient to yourself. Even if you're not the most healthy, you're probably more healthy than your patient that's out there, right? So a lot of times we are going to do stress testing on those patients that are at risk and have other health concerns, right? Why do we stress test them? And stress test means we're going to put them to the point of breaking, right? Push them as hard as we can to see how far it takes until they kind of shut down. I had this done about 4 years ago. I went into the hospital with some cardiac condition, and they still don't know what it was. But my cardiac output dropped down to 15%. And so they did a stress test on me. And there's 2 different types of stress tests they can do. One stress test, they put you on a treadmill, and they measure your oxygen output. You have a little mask you wear, like the VO2, and you run until your heart rate gets to max heart rate. The other stress test they can do is they lay you on a table and shoot you full of adenosine. And adenosine will kick your heart rate into high gear. When they shot me full of that stuff, it literally felt like my heart was going to explode immediately. They're like, okay, get ready, here it comes, and nothing prepares you for that. I was like, all of a sudden I felt like I ran five flights of stairs, right? And the goal is to see how functional your heart is. Why do we do that? Well, we want to make sure that the heart is fully functional before we do anything with them. Let's say you're at a clinic that works with cardiac patients. Would it be important to know how functional their heart is? I would think so, right? You definitely want to know, before you push this patient to having a heart attack, what we can do, right? Let's say that, again, let's say Emily's one of your patients. Well, that's what we're going to get into. Let's say Emily's one of your patients, and then you have 65-year-old Millie who's had 2 heart attacks. Are your exercise programs going to be fundamentally different for those 2 patients, even if they have the same condition? Yeah, right? Because Emily's got a functional heart. We can have her doing a little bit more hearty activities than maybe Millie, because Millie, if we push her too far, she's going to have a heart attack on us. And we don't want to do that. So how do we decide which ones to do? Well, the main idea is once between the stress test and the energy or the adenosine test, it depends upon what your condition that they suspect you to have. So when your cardiac output is lower, they're going to do the chemical induced stress test. When your cardiac output is higher, they're going to do the physical stress test. And the main idea behind that is, if you have a low cardiac output, you start putting me in the treadmill and start me running, you can stress the heart to failure and you can't stop it. Whereas if you shoot me full of adenosine, you can give me anticholinergics and kill the adenosine in my body and rapidly bring me back down to baseline. So it's a little easier to control that adenosine stress test versus the physical stress test. I love this. The regular stress test, they do multi-stage testing. It runs about 1 to 6 minutes at 1.5 to 5 miles an hour, and then inclines from 0 to 18%. And I don't know if any of you have ever run on an 18% incline, but it's definitely not the easiest thing in the world, right? So 18% is about there. It may not seem like much, but that is severely increased cardiac workload to do it. Where I'm from back in Pennsylvania, we have 2 ways, uphill, downhill. So when you're running there, you better be good at running uphill. So frequency of exercise program is going to depend upon the individual and their condition, right? If we're working with a patient, what do you think a good exercise program frequency for a patient would be? How many times a week should they exercise? For like you guys, how many times a week should you guys try to exercise? 5 times would be ideal, right? 3 to 5 is kind of what we say. So we usually say 3 to 5. 7 is perfect. If you can get a patient exercise 7 times a week, go for it, as long as they're being safe, right? But studies have shown that even exercising 3 times a week at a moderate level does amazing things for your health, right? And a moderate level is where you get to that point where your heart's working, not just, all right, exercise 1, got exercise 1, exercise 2. Good. Exercise 3. No, you actually got to get some heart going, right? The overload principle comes into play here. For training to occur, load must exceed training stimulus. This doesn't have to do with cardiac here, but I'm going to use a bench press for an example on this. Let's say, well, right now, my max bench press is somewhere around 215, right? If I want to increase my max bench press, what do I have to do? How am I going to increase my max bench press? Yeah, more often, right? And eventually I'm going to have to do what to the weight? Increase it, yeah, right? So that's what the overload principle says. If I want to get better, I have to do more, right? If you guys want to get better at studying, you have to study more. That's overload principle, right? You have to kind of work at that point. I'm guilty of this, honestly, at the gym and everything like that. When we had the gym, is I've kind of stayed at a plateau where I really haven't increased or decreased my activity level, right? And then I'm wondering, well, why am I not losing weight? Why am I not doing this? Well, because I've kept the status quo. My body's used to that load. I'm not overloading it and working it. So if you want to get in a better physical shape, you have to stress the body to the point of almost breaking, but not breaking. When you have patients that's got compromised cardio conditions, that's a spelling mistake. Cardio conditions, you have to be paying attention. Again, you're going to be wanting to monitor their vitals all the time. The higher the intensity, the longer the intervals you work with a patient, the faster the training effect occurs. The other thing that we talk about here is the specificity principle. You train for what you're training for. Let's say you want to become, you play softball and you want to become a better batter. Say that fast, better batter. What should you do if you want to become a better batter? More reps, right? Hit the ball. If I want to become a better batter, is me being out in the outfield throwing the ball back and forth between another person going to improve my ability to hit a ball? So I'm out in the outfield, I'm just tossing the ball back and forth. No, right? The only way I'm going to get better at doing something is by doing the thing. Now, is there some crossover? Absolutely. Like, say I want to become a marathon runner and I get on a bike and I ride a bike hardcore. There's going to be some crossover effect from me doing that. But I'm still not going to be able to run a marathon until I actually work to running a marathon. That specificity principle says you want to train for what you're training for, right? Endurance won't make dramatic improvements in power and vice versa. So if I want to become powerful, I've got to do power activities. If I want to improve my endurance, I've got to do endurance activities. If I want to improve both, I have to work on both, right? So if you want to become more of a power lifter, and you'll talk when you meet guys that are true power lifters, they basically do no cardio whatsoever. The only thing they do is lift, box up, okay, down. That's how they train, because that's what they're going for, right? Put them in a boxing ring with a world-class boxer and see how fast they tire out. If they get a hit on, great, it's going to hurt. But, that boxer dances around for about 5 minutes. The other person is exhausted because they don't have that cardio endurance. So you want to train. So let's say you're working with me and I've got a compromised heart and you want to improve the blood flow coming out of my heart. Well, just having me sit there and do curls is not going to improve that. The way you're going to improve my heart pumping blood is getting my heart to pump blood. Now, doing curls is going to increase my blood flow? Sure. But what you need to do is get me doing aerobic activities like running, like being on a bike, like getting on an elliptical, maybe doing jumping jacks, anything like that to increase my aerobic activity so that my heart starts pumping more. Once you do that, I will improve cardio-wise. So the mode meets the individual needs of the patient. Whatever we're doing, we need to think of the individual needs of the patient. Again, let's take this as an example. You're in a clinic, an outpatient clinic, and you've got a patient that is a bodybuilder and you've got a patient that's a soccer player, right? The type of activities you do with those patients are going to be vastly different, right? This is a key thing here, the reversibility principle. This is where our bodies kind of bites us in the butt. Detraining occurs much more rapidly than the process of training somebody, right? A lot of times you'll hear, and it's not a hard, true, it's not one of those hard science facts, but it's pretty close, that 1 day of rest undoes 7 days of training. Think about that for a second. 1 day of rest detrains you by 7 days. How many of you have ever gotten the flu and been down for 2 or 3 days and then gone back to the gym after the flu's over? What do you feel like? Yes. Yeah, you feel weak sauce, right? You're like, oh my God, I was able to do, 15 minutes on the treadmill. Here I am, I got 10 and I'm exhausted. What's going on? Well, when you're down for those 2 or 3 days, you just detrained by 20 days, right? A lot of times when you think about it, if you're down for the average work week for 5 days, right? You've lost a month's worth of training. And it's going to take you a month to get all that back. Bed rest is the greatest killer to any training regimen. Putting somebody on bed rest, yeah, you lost all leg muscles. Amazing, right? When I broke my neck and my arm went into a sling, it was like 2 weeks and I lost most of the use of my muscles in my arm. It amazed me how fast detraining occurs. So even with an injury, maintaining a modicum of training can help reduce the overall detraining effects. You're going to find this in the hospital. For those of you that are interested in going to inpatient, what's really going to kind of bug you a little bit is you're working in a hospital in the acute care setting, you're going to become a glorified walking simulator. Because a lot of what you're going to do with patients is nothing more than walking through the halls. A lot of walking through the halls. So much walking through the halls. Right? But why do we do that? Even that small amount of walking is going to help offset the detraining that's occurring from them laying down all day. So any amount of activity. So what if you go in and you see a patient and they say, no, not today, I don't want physical therapy. Why is it important to overcome that? Well, because the longer they spend in that bed, the less chance they have of getting out of it. And I tell my patients that. I am pretty aggressive about that. I'll tell them, look, I appreciate that you don't want to do this, but if you want to get out of here, you got to work with me, because just sitting there, you're going to stay. And you can see this, right? I've seen patients come in with strokes and they refuse day 1, day 2, day 3 of physical therapy. And then they come in for day 4 and they're just like, they're ready to work, but now they can't because the detraining has just knocked them back 28 days. And they don't understand that the sooner they get up and move, the faster they'll get out of the hospital. And that's something we have to stress to them as physical therapist assistants and physical therapists is, look, dude or lady, we got to get you moving, right? I always joke with the patient, I know you don't want to see me. Your best way of not seeing me is getting up. Because if they get up and move, I'm going to leave them alone. So I get them up and moving and doing stuff, I'll be out of there faster and I won't harass them. You say no to me, I'm coming back 3-4 times in the day. I don't care what you say. Come back, check on you. How you doing? Are we ready to get up and walk? Right? Because I know that the longer they stay in that bed, the worse they're going to get.
Mr. McKeever, when you say 1 day of rest, do you mean like just in the bed the whole time?
Yeah, typically. Now, even if today, like, I just walk around the house, even just walking around the house is going to detrain me. It's some movement, but at least it's not going to be detraining as if I just spend the whole day in bed. So yes, so 1 full day of rest is you're losing a week worth of training is 1 day of bed rest. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's just disappointing to hear.
It's sad, isn't it? It's really amazing that it happens that quickly. We wouldn't think of it. So that's why if in the in a lot of the like the outpatient journals and stuff like now that's right now going on, they're really worried about what our society is going to look like when we come out of this full quarantine lockdown. Even though we're out now more than we were, we're going to have a lot of detraining. And that's kind of scary, right? Which predisposes us to more heart conditions, more lung conditions, opens us up more to get COVID, right? So that's kind of scary. So here's kind of the, well, no, rest days are good, right? But when you say a rest day does, when people hear rest day, they think I'm going to lay down all day and watch TV and eat some bonbons. A rest day for workout should be something where it involves a nice long brisk walk, right? So more of an active rest day, exactly, Emily, right? Where you're doing a little bit or going out playing with your kids and doing stuff like that. That's kind of the rest day ideally you want. You know, just avoiding the bonbon days. All right, so here's CDC and Surgeon General's kind of key for this. For children ages 6 to 17, they should be getting moderate to vigorous exercise, 60 minutes of it. What does QD mean? You remember QD from a medical term? Every day, bro. It's every day, bro. Just don't loot Phoenix Malls. Some of you will get that joke, some of you won't. So kids, okay, Jaira got it, good. Kids should get 60 minutes of moderate exercise to vigorous exercise daily. And that's why if you follow the NFL, they have a thing right now, it's called Play 60, right? Where they encourage kids to play for 60 minutes a day where they're out doing stuff. For adults, ages 18 to 65, and I really stress maybe 18 being an adult, but yeah, legally it's an adult. You should at least get 30 minutes of moderate exercise 5 days a week or 20 minutes of vigorous exercise 3 days a week. Right? So the harder you work out, the less days a week you really have to, right? Older adults, so once you get 65 or older, I'm almost there, at least 30 minutes of moderate exercise 5 days a week or 20 minutes 3 days a week. Well, that looks awful familiar. That looks almost like, adults. Well, it's because we don't differentiate between older adults and regular adults. Right? Now, when you're 50 to 65 with chronic health condition, you should ideally keep the same amount of level, but you may have to monitor and lower your intensity levels based upon what happens to your vitals, right? Really important. I'm really in love, again, with my Apple Watch. I can't tell you how much, I didn't want to talk to you, Siri. Go away. It's really helped me kind of monitor what my heart does, right? We have some amazing technology now to monitor our overall vitals, which we didn't have 15 years ago, right? We didn't have necessarily the best pulse oxes. The only pulse oxes we had 15 years ago were the ones that clipped onto your finger that were attached to the wall reader. Now we've got ones that right on your finger and you're done. Walk around with it all day long. And if you don't have a pulse ox meter, I would highly recommend picking up one of your own. You can pick them up for like $15. But if you're interested, if you're going to be working ever at outpatient or you're ever going to be working at, a home health setting, it's really good to have one of those in your kind of toolkit. Plus also it's one of the biggest predictors of you getting COVID too, when you watch your oxygen levels drop. So exercise. Well, the first thing we got to do is warm up, right? And I always love the people say, I don't need to warm up, and then they injure themselves. Warm-up's job is not necessarily something you want to do, right? But it's something that keeps you from injuring yourself. So you want some total body movement activities that should bring the person within 20 beats per minute of their target heart rate, right? So warm up, you should get up, you should get moving, should get some blood flowing. You can do something like jumping jacks are a great example. I like to use the elliptical for my warm up because my elliptical gets me to kind of move my arms around, get my legs around, overall get my whole body moving. Even if I'm gonna run, a lot of times I try to warm up with the elliptical. Running can be a valid warm up, but you run at a lower level. And then we're gonna get into exercise once we've warmed up. So there are a couple different types of exercises. Continuous training exercise means that you're going to work at that sub-maximum level. So it's just below your max level for long periods of time, right? So that's where you're going to work. So if you're going to run, you're going to get on that treadmill and you're just going to run, or you're going to go outside and you're just going to run. That would be a continuous training. Interval training. And a lot of studies have now shown that interval training might be the better way to condition us. Interval training is where we do bursts of intense activity followed by periods. I love it says rest. Better idea is lower level activity. So this would be maybe where we run full bore for 3 minutes and then back it down to a slow jog, and then run full bore for 3 minutes and then back it down to a slow jog. Run, slow down. And if you actually look at the military's training kind of plan now for you to get ready for the military, this is the way they recommend it. You know, they start you off doing 2 minutes of running and 5 minutes of walking until every week you adjust that by 1 minute until you're running more than you're walking. That's interval training. It gets your body kind of used to doing longer continuous training. Circuit training is where you do sub-maximum energy levels using various equipment. So, for example, if we're doing cardiac activity, it may be something like where you do 5 minutes on the bike, 5 minutes on the elliptical, 5 minutes on the treadmill, then back to the bike. That would be a circuit training. And then circuit interval training would be where you do that same idea where you do multiple devices, but you do that burst and rest period as you're going through it. I find when I do interval training, I exhaust myself most. There's something about that continuous training, and I assume some of you guys are runners, that once you kind of get into that set pattern of running, you can definitely feel yourself get into the pattern, and your energy level doesn't necessarily decrease, but it just feels like you're into the groove at that point. Well, if you're in the groove, you're kind of not getting training going. So you've got to break up those grooves a little bit and get yourself going with some bursts. Got to use that, was it the Total Gym that Chuck Norris sells? And then after you've done your exercise period, you've got to do a cool down period. And what a cool down period is a level of lower activity where you start bringing the muscles back to normal everyday function. Your cool down can be something as simple as doing yoga. I've heard that's a really great thing. I don't know. I'm not flexible enough to do yoga. You could do something like walking on a treadmill or just walking around the gym. Stretching is ideal, right? Stretching helps reduce DOMS. The more you stretch, the better you're going to feel after your workouts. And then just keep applying yourself to this, right? So let's say today you didn't do as well as you thought you could do. Well, that's great. Document it, move on. Make tomorrow a different day, right? You can't, a lot of problems that people run into when they're training, when they're getting into this aerobic exercise training is they have one bad day, and that one bad day sets them back 5 days training because they're like, oh God, I didn't do well today. And then they get up the next day and they're like, yeah, I didn't do good yesterday. So you know what? That's okay. I'm just not going to exercise today, right? It's a lot easier to not do your activity than it is to do your activity, right? And then once you stop the activity for one day, that next day of stopping is easier, and the next day of stopping is really hard to get back into the groove. So establishing target heart rate. So how do we know what our target heart rate is? First of all, how do we know what max heart rate is? How do you calculate max heart rate? There's a chart for it. Good, right? Max heart rate equals 220 minus your age, right? So let's say that you're a 20-year-old person. Your max heart rate is 200. I'm going to bring this up in the middle here so I can actually work with it. We're going to do some math here. Oh, no. So your max heart rate is 200, right? So when you're working with a PT or you're working with a doctor, a lot of times what you're going to see is they're going to give them something like that, a 70% target heart rate. So how do you calculate that? So your target heart rate is going to be your max heart rate times whatever your percentage is. Right. So again, if we have 200 in this case, right, you're going to go over here, equals 200 times 70%, right? Same thing as saying 0.7. So what are we at? What's our max? What's our target heart rate we want to be at? For somebody with a 200 max heart rate, 140. Good. So that's where we want you working if you're looking at target heart rate. What that says is the majority of your activity that you're doing should be within 135 to 145. Right? So when you're exercising, you want to keep your heart rate there. So how do you do that? You measure it, right? And if you're not at the target heart rate, you pick up the activity a little. If you're too high, you back it down, right? Now, when they say max heart rate, does that mean if I go, if my max heart rate is 200 and I get my heart rate up to 201, I'm going to die? No, that's not what it means, right? Because let's think about this for a second, right? Max heart rate for somebody that's 90 years old, what's their max heart rate? What's max heart rate for somebody that's 90 years old? 90 minus 220. 130, right? How easy is it to get to 130 beats per minute? It's actually pretty easy. Right? Just, yeah, doing a little bit of hard activity. So think about that for a second. If we said, well, once you hit max heart rate, your heart's going to explode, and we have little old Millie who's 90 years old, and we get her working out a little bit, and she's at 135 heart rate, we're like, oh my God, your heart's going to blow up. No, but it's a warning, right? We want to try to keep it under those max heart rates. So your max heart rate, again, is 220 minus your age. Your target heart rate is when we're going to look at our max heart rate times a percentage. So once you establish that target heart rate and max heart rate, we work on it. So you're going to warm up gradually for 5 to 10 minutes, include stretching or repetitive motions at slow speed, gradually increasing the effort. Then we're going to increase the pace of the heart or the target or the activity so we get to our target heart rate. We're going to maintain it for about 20 to 30 minutes. Fast walking, running, bicycling, swimming, cross country, all this can be worked. Or even aerobic dancing. I think, what's that company that makes all the online exercise? Beachbody. Right? I think Beachbody's got all kinds of dancing you can do. You can country line dancing for aerobic. You can do hip hop dancing for aerobic activities. Or you could just be me and go, no, there's no way because I have 2 left feet. But any type of aerobic activity for that 20 to 30 minutes, keeping your heart rate up is what you want. And then cool down. You're going to come down for about 5 to 10 minutes again. Slow total body activities with stretching. And then 3 to 5 times a week for that. So just looking at this, and I'm not looking for answers, but think to yourself, right now, ideally, if you want to do some cardio training, you should be hitting about 70% of your target heart rate, or so your target heart rate should be somewhere around 70%. So if you're in your 20s, you're talking 140 to 160. It should be where you're hitting every time you're training. And just think to yourself, am I pushing myself that hard to hit it? Maybe you need to work aerobic conditioning a little bit more. I know I do, right? So that's what we're working at. To avoid injury from stress, oh gosh, I'll look at that later. That'll be great. Avoid injuries from stress, use appropriate equipment such as correct footwear, right? Make sure you're using proper biomechanical support. We're even looking at this point, is footwear, do we need shoes for running, right? Is anyone in here a natural runner where you wear those weird toe shoes? I forget what those are called. They have a specific name. Asics, yeah. I wear Asics too, but it's because I have oversupination, so I have to wear them, right? But we're looking at, I forget what those shoes are called, but we're looking at maybe that one of our problems with our feet is our shoes, skeletos. And there was actually a lady who came in and presented some research to UNLV that she did some research where she took people and stopped them from wearing shoes when they're working out, and their arches actually returned to a more natural arch formation because they had to rely on their foot for shock absorption, less on the shoe. It was actually kind of interesting. To avoid overuse syndromes and structures of the musculoskeletal system, proper warm-up and stretching should be used. You always want to warm up, and we want to stay within tolerance of the individual. Overuse commonly occurs where there's an increase in time or effort without adequate rest. So you want to have some rest between your activities, right? You wouldn't want to run a marathon tonight and then turn around and run it again in the morning. You got to let yourself a little bit of recovery, right? If pain begins while exercising or lasts longer than 2 hours after exercising, heed that warning, right? If you're having a ton of pain, that means you're doing something wrong. Pay attention to it and adjust accordingly. Individualized program the exercise. All people are not the same fitness level and therefore cannot perform the same exercise. If we all go jump on a treadmill right now, take all 26 of us and we all get on treadmill and we start the treadmill, let's say we walk at 5.5 miles an hour. What we're going to find is we all fade at some point. Some of us, you may be going for an hour at 5.5. Some of us, we go 5 minutes and we're like, I'm tapping out, right? Any one exercise has the potential to be detrimental if attempted by someone not able to execute it properly. This is what I call, and I'm sorry if anyone does this, but this is what I call the CrossFit effect, right? And it's not all CrossFit gyms, and I know I'm generalizing here, but almost every CrossFit gym I've ever been to, right? Every CrossFit gym I've ever been to focuses on completing the activity over completing the activity properly. And I have a buddy who is a DI down at Paris Island, and he personally absolutely despises CrossFit because you should see, he sent me videos of some of the recruits coming in to become Marines and watching them do pull-ups. Because they're like kicking their feet, they're throwing their feet up in the air trying to get themselves to do pull-ups. And they're like, well, this is the way I did it in the gym. Well, too bad we're not in the gym anymore. A real pull-up from here to here. Yeah, the jerky things, right? It's amazing how completion over form, right? And again, this is generalized. There are some really good CrossFit gyms out there, and mainly a lot of those good CrossFit gyms are run by somebody that maybe has, a CSCS or is an athletic trainer. A lot of those are like that. And, face it, right now, CrossFit is the latest trend. It's a trend I wish would go away, but it's the latest trend. The one thing I'll say about CrossFit, personally, from my perspective, is job security. That's all I'll say. I know, she's getting on me. We've had this discussion before, so she knew this was coming at some point. She is retired from CrossFit, right? For example, I'm going to use this. Before this quarantine, I had a patient who I was seeing at an outpatient. He was a 15 15-year-old kid. His problem was he had a complete patellar resection from CrossFit. Right, and this is what I'm getting at right now. He was doing 24-inch box jumps on a concrete block. So he's jumping from the floor up 2 feet onto a concrete block. Landed and missed the 1 foot. Came down right above the tibial plateau on the edge of the concrete block and split the patella clean in half, or the patellar tendon clean in half. So he got a Popeye tear and literally his quad rolled up in his leg. And I asked, why were you jumping on a concrete block? And he's like, because my CrossFit instructor told me to. Like, were you able to do it? Yeah, but I got really tired and that's why I kind of got sloppy. Well, then form, right? Just saying. During recovery from following an injury or surgery, choose an exercise that does not stress the vulnerable tissue. If you've got a knee injury, maybe instead of getting cardio on a bike or a treadmill, go do the arm bike, the upper body ergometer, right? Begin at safe levels, and again, take care of it. Oh, I could smack talk jujitsu all I want, but I don't want to throw you around. Well, I think it's a little bit of both, Renee, too. I think it was a little bit of, he's, a 15-year-old kid and really should be watched the whole time he's exercising. Let's face it, 15-year-old boy doesn't always have the best frontal lobe to make decisions, right? 15-year-old boy sees 15-year-old girl across the gym, form goes out the window. And they're just following instructions, especially in the gym that he went to, because I actually talked to his instructor, and I asked him about it, because he calls me, and he's like, so when can he get back to CrossFit? He's missing out. And I'm like, well, he just had patellar surgery. It's going to be a while. He's got to get back to CrossFit. We're training for the CrossFit Games. I don't know. I'm like, well, he's not going to be doing your CrossFit Games anytime soon. We're more worried about him walking. Just saying. That guy was an idiot. Did I say that out loud? I did say that out loud. My frontal lobe's being affected. All right. Cardiovascular, physiological changes. As you train, you increase your stroke volume. You increase your cardiac output, and you increase your oxygen permeability, meaning overall, the longer you train with exercise, the better your heart and your blood system works. Your respiratory system, you get larger lung volumes and improved efficiency. Your metabolic system, your mitochondria, improves and actually proliferates, meaning there's more mighty mitochondria throughout your whole body. And then overall, you have decreased fat body percentages, decreases in bad cholesterol, improved thermoregulation, improved musculoskeletal resistance to injuries, right? If any of you were in my house right now, you'd probably be complaining because I keep my house at about 69 degrees. I just say that's because I'm in such a great physiological shape that I'm naturally warm. That's what I like to tell myself, right? But overall, I've got a real high efficiency energy. I made sure of that. And also solar panels. It can get a little pricey, but solar panels help severely, right? Overall, what that shows you is just doing that training, that training for 3 to 5 times a week in either moderate or maximal efficiency or vigorous training does some really good things. The other thing is, if you do this in combination with changing other lifestyle habits, like stopping smoking or starting eating healthier, the overall changes to your health can be dramatic. The Iceman. Which Iceman? Are you talking about the caveman that we found in the ice up in the Arctic? Because that would be me. They just chipped me out and brought me down to teach you guys. Which Iceman are you talking about, Renee? Chocolate. I was thinking of Iceman from Top Gun. That's crazy. I'm going to have to look that up now. That probably would be me. And then I'd die of hypothermia. And it really probably, if you look at him, he probably has pretty good cardio training. Just saying. I'm not that good. It's like those people that swim across the English Channel, because that English Channel gets cold. All right, so patients with coronary disease. Out of all, sounds like Chuck Norris. No, Chuck Norris really kicks all their butts, right? A snake bit Chuck Norris once, and it held on for 5 days, then the snake died. Okay, go ahead, Eric. What's your question about rest before we get into this? Because this is going to be an important part I want to cover. So what's your question about rest day?
Okay, cool. Thank you. So how many days would you recommend doing the active rest, or is it like, oh, it depends on your body and what it needs?
It's going to depend upon what you need. I mean, like if you're doing 3 days of active, vigorous exercise, like I said, what I would do is I would just space your rest days in between each of those. You know, so you do a day of activity, a day of rest, a day of activity, a day of rest, a day of activity, and that should keep you pretty healthy. But again, when you're doing that rest, it's not just, right? You want to get some activity going, just not max. Does that make sense? I will have to look at that, Renee. That sounds interesting. All right. What you got there, Emily?
So I've noticed, because I usually lift heavy.
Yep.
So I've noticed, yeah.
Tiny as you are? No, just kidding.
A lot stronger than I look, I promise. Yeah, because if I don't lift heavy, I really get tiny.
Yep.
But I've noticed that sometimes when I do take like a day or two off, when I go back to the gym, I'm significantly stronger.
Well, so there is that curve. There's a strength retraining curve that occurs as well.
Okay.
So it's a balance, but I'm betting on those days that you take off, you don't just take off and sit at home and eat bonbons either.
There's no time for that.
Right, that's what I'm getting at. So that's why you kind of have that where you're still active, but what you've done is literally you've trained your mitochondria and beefed them up so that when they get an active rest day, they are really good at resting.
Okay.
So, and again, that's going to happen the more you train. The better you train, the less you actually have to train to do activities. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah, the better, the more, and it takes me a lot longer to train than it's ever going to take you to train.
Okay.
All right, no problem. So if there's no other slide that is important in this whole lecture, this slide is important because your boards love to ask questions about inpatient coronary disease recovery. So coronary disease is artery disease, heart disease, anything like that. And what they'll talk about is phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 recovery. So phase 1 recovery, let's say tomorrow I have a heart attack, knocking on wood. Tomorrow I have a heart attack. My inpatient phase 1 recovery would start 3 days after my heart attack. Usually for the first 1 to 2 days after my heart attack, PT is not going to see me because again, they need to figure out how bad that damage is to my heart first. And once they kind of determine that through imaging and through all the tests they're going to do, at day 3, I've got to start my inpatient phase of rehabilitation. A lot of times at that point, the only thing I'm going to be doing is activities of daily living, getting dressed, brushing my teeth, showering, stuff like that, and then walking. There should be no resistive training whatsoever when a patient has a cardiac insult for the first of that acute phase. In those first couple of days, don't give them a TheraBand, don't give them a weight, nothing like that. The only type of resistive training they should be doing is gravity assisted. So if you want to have them do curls, great. Have them do curls, but no weight in their hand. Use gravity only. The key thing for inpatient phase 1 that your boards will ask you about is, can you do resistive training in phase 1 cardiac recovery? And the answer is, can you do resistive training? No, there you go, good, that's all. So you may get a board question where it's talking to you guys about an inpatient that's inpatient phase 1. It says, which of the following activities would be, it's okay, I don't care about caps, would be appropriate for a patient that is in phase 1 activities. So you'll go down through and it'll say something like doing curls with doing bicep curls with a 5-pound weight, doing hamstring curls with a 10-pound cuff weight, lat pull downs with a red TheraBand, walking 300 feet times 2. Your choice for that inpatient phase 1 should be walking 300 feet times 2, because that is what's appropriate for inpatient phase 1 rehab. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So main thing again, phase 1, no resistance. Now, phase 2 is kind of, if you look, there's a big gap here between 3 to 5 days and 6 to 8 weeks. Well, because now they've probably, so when you have a cardiac insult, a lot of times you're going to go through, probably 2 weeks worth of inpatient and then another 2 to 4 weeks of rehab where you're going to a rehab facility. So when we talk about phase 2, we're now at the outpatient. They've gone through inpatient acute care. They've gone through rehab. They're now coming to see you at the outpatient clinic, right? At the point that they're at phase 2 rehab at about 6 weeks, we can now start adding weight training. If you look at most of the research, it says it's better to add resistive band training than it is to add weights. But it doesn't really matter. And you'll find that the research says that, but a lot of times you'll see that the research is, this research for cardiac rehab founded by TheraBand. Well, they might have a vested interest in showing that, resistive bands are more appropriate for cardiac therapy than weights. I'm just saying. So pay attention to your research when you're looking at it, right? we can start at phase 2 adding some weight training. So we can start giving them some weights. We can start giving them some resistive training. We can start being resistive to them, right? So we don't really want to do a lot of resistance with them until we're at that outpatient phase. And then phase 3 is also called their lifelong phase, right? So at this point, they've gone through inpatient, they've gone through outpatient, now they're kind of out on their own. A lot of these patients should see physical therapy for the rest of their life. Now, they don't necessarily have to come 3 to 5 times a week, but they should come about once a month for kind of a checkup, right? And the main goal there is to put them in this monitoring period where we make sure that they don't lose more, right? And then compensate for any loss that they have. Cardiac patients complete 35% less work with upper extremities than lower extremities before symptoms occur. What that is saying is, if you are doing resistive training with your patients, understand if I do upper body resistive training, it's going to work my heart harder than my lower body because my upper body is closer to my heart, right? There's a lot of, one of the things that when I went in for my heart condition, that the doc that came in and talked to me, is like, well, what kind of exercise do you do? I'm like, well, I do a lot of push-ups. And he's like, well, you're not going to be doing a lot of push-ups for a while. And he showed me that by doing push-ups, I'm really stressing my heart when you have a heart condition. I'm back to doing my push-ups now, but I had to back down on not doing them as much because I had to lower my upper extremity workout and start doing more stuff like squats and stuff like that, which sucked. And then we're going to work on adaptive changes. As their conditions change, we may have to change their activity. So it's really important to pay attention to that. Chronic illnesses, anyone that's deconditioned or chronic illness, we've got to watch them. Our main goal for somebody that's deconditioned and is in that phase where they're just really weak is to reverse that deconditioning. Erica said that she lost a lot of her strength when she was in the hospital, right? That would make her a deconditioned patient. Well, at that point, we've got to try to reverse that as quickly as possible. But understand that training occurs slower than detraining, right? And this gets really frustrated, especially when you have athletes that get something like an ACL repair or get some sort of a knee repair or a hip repair, because they want to get back to where they were. And what you have to focus that athlete on, or even this old person, is it's not about what you were able to do a week ago, right? It's about what you could do yesterday to today. That's what you want to compare yourself against. Because if you compare yourself to a week ago, right? If I compare what I was able to do when I got my black belt and I was playing football compared to now, I'm like, God, I suck. Why am I such a slob, right? Because back then I was in my peak physical condition, but now I'm in the side of the peak and I'm rolling down it. So you've got to pay attention. Make adaptations, participation restrictions, anything that have disabilities, activity restrictions, functional conditions, any deconditioning. And we want to look at their impairments. What do they have a problem? If you have a patient that has paralysis of the legs, well, you're probably not going to do the treadmill with them. I'm just saying. Funny story, I just had one of the students from the other cohort contact me who's at a neurological clinic. And he says to me, he goes, oh, I got to work with this patient. I just want to run some ideas by you. And you guys will have this too. When you guys go out in your clinics, if you have something you want to run it by me, shoot me a text message. I'm always open to running ideas. He's like, so my patient has a complete spinal cord injury at C7. And my PT asked me to come up with some activities tomorrow. So I thought, one of the things I'd do is I'd get him up and walking on the treadmill. And Mr. McKeever had a little stroke. And I'm like, so your patient has a spinal cord injury at C7, and you're gonna put them on the treadmill. And so I sent him a video of me just flopping around on the bed. I'm like, this is what your C7 looks like. You're not going to get him up and moving on the treadmill. And he just totally wasn't thinking. He got so focused on coming up with a good activity program. He had all these activities for him. And the patient's only got his arms. And not even all of his arms. Right? So you've got to take care based upon their impairments. Right? You want to do activities with a patient like that, you might be able to get them on the upper body ergometer. But a lot of your activity is just going to be seated balance with their arms down to balance themselves. It's funny, but it'll happen to you guys too. It's just one of those, when I had students, I just call that the overeager syndrome, because you get so focused. I give you a task and you get so focused on doing this task that you forget about the diagnosis of the patient. It's kind of funny. So age differences, right? Depending upon, this is in your Therex book, there's obviously our age difference between children, young adults, and older adults will affect all of these right side topics, right? So when you're a child, do you have a faster heart rate or slower heart rate than an adult? Faster, right? Yeah. Especially when you get down to the baby, man. So for those of you that are parents, what's that heart rate sound like? It's like subwoofer cat, right? Stroke volume. Well, because children have a higher heart rate, they don't need as much of a stroke volume because their heart's pumping faster, right? So they have a lower stroke volume than we have, which means their cardiac output's a little bit lower. But as you change, you get older, cardiac output will peak somewhere around your 30s, and then it all goes downhill from here. Your max oxygen uptake changes, your blood pressure changes. As you get older, your blood pressure just gets worse, folks. Why does your blood pressure get worse? Because it doesn't matter what you do, you all will start getting arteriosclerosis, where your arteries will start hardening. We're just built for failure. Our bodies will overall change. You'll find a lot of times your muscle mass and strength will change. I'm finding it interesting right now, when I was, back even in the martial arts days and football, I could never define any muscles. It didn't matter how hard I worked out or what my diet was. I just got big. That's all it was. I never looked like, those guys on the cover of Muscle magazine where you've got ripped muscles showing everywhere. I just got bigger, right? I was your traditional, power lifter. But now I'm finding as I'm getting older, I'm actually getting some muscle definition just because my body is changing, right? I don't like getting older. It sucks. Your anaerobic ability changes as you get older, right? That actually decreases as you get older. So you're able to do less and less, not only aerobically, but anaerobically as well. Yeah, some of them do dehydrate themselves. I actually was at one of our old students actually is a professional body image and bodybuilder. And I went to see him back behind stage, and they're rubbing Preparation H all over their body. Does anyone know what Preparation H is? Yeah, butt cream, good, right? It's to shrink hemorrhoids, right? So it does the same thing, right? It tightens the skin. Yeah. So they rub it all over the body. I'm like, oh my God, are you seriously rubbing Preparation H all over your body? It's like, yeah, man, look at that definition. It's great. I don't know if I recommend that. All right. Tell you what, can we do 10 minutes of the next lecture and I'll cut you guys free. We'll call that our break at the end. How's that sound? So we'll wrap up around 40 after, and we'll call that for the day. So let's get to the next lecture, because I was going to give you a break, but I'd rather just keep going and start the next lecture and then cut you loose a little bit early. That works out a little bit better for everybody. So let's screen share here. So now that we've talked about cardiac performance, we're now going to talk about resistive performance. So resistive exercises, we're now starting to add some form of resistance. Costco does sell mass amounts of Preparation H. They told me that's where they get it. They should just sell tubs. So strength, power, and endurance are some key terms when we're talking about muscle resistance here. Strength is the greatest measurable force that can be exerted by a muscle or control a load. Strength training is key to PT, right? Power is force over a distance. It's the rate of performing work. Power training, though, can't be developed until we've developed efficient strength to lift. So you can't do power training until you've developed strength. And then endurance is where you do the activity over and over and over again to build up just a general, ability to do it repetitively. Has anyone ever worked in a warehouse before? I did it way back when I worked for Amazon back in Pennsylvania, right? What's it feel like that first week that you work at a warehouse? Sucks, right? So it can be confusing too, right? But that first day you work, you go home and you're like, I hurt in areas that I didn't know it was possible to hurt in. Like I remember the middle of my foot hurting. And I'm like, why is the middle of my foot hurting? And I didn't understand back then, I probably got plantar fasciitis, right? Oh, it was UPS I was working for. So my job consisted of a box coming off a truck like this, picking that box up, turning and putting the box on this belt, or turning and putting the box on this belt. That was my job. Box comes down, this belt, depending upon the code on the box. What they don't prepare you for is you reach for the first box and it's 5 pounds. You do it. You reach for the next box, it's 75 pounds. And my body just didn't have the sufficient strength or power to do that, right? So I did a couple of them, and then my power kind of decreased over time. And then my endurance started decreasing. The more I did it and worked at the warehouse, the more I was able to do it. That's the same idea here, right? When we're doing training with a patient, the more we have them doing their activities, the stronger they're going to get, the more they're going to build up powers, right? Yes, truck loader for UPS is a nightmare. That's just, I don't understand those conditions. It's just ridiculous. That's why they pay you so well, because they know that you're only going to stick around for a little bit of time because you're going to burn out. So we talked about the overload principle, right? To improve muscle performance, you must overload the muscle's capability. So let's say, again, so we'll say that you've got a patient that's got, you're working bench press with the patient, and their max bench press, they can do 100 pounds 5 times. If we wanted to apply the overload principle, how could we overload those muscles? What could we do? So they can do 100 pounds 5 times. What else could we have them do? So we want to get them stronger. Could we do 105 pounds 4 times? Yeah, right? Or could we push them to get that 6th rep and we help them through the 6th rep and spot them through it? Right? That's getting that overload principle going, right? That's where you get that kind of tremble going on in the negative sets, exactly, right? You get everything. Or maybe if you really want to do it hard, go eccentric, right? So if you ever want to see how strong your muscles are and how good your eccentric control is, do eccentric bench press once, where when you're pushing up, it's a quick pop. But when you're coming down, it should take you 30 to 45 seconds to bring the bar all the way down to your chest. And then you pop it back up. And then 30 to 45 seconds to bring it back down to your chest. And see how sore your muscles are. It'll kill you, right? You're overloading the muscles to train them to improve. SAID principle says specific adaptation of imposed demands. What it means is if you're going to do one type of activity, that activity you should do. We already talked about that. To build specificity of training, you have to do the activity you're doing. Transfer training is carryover from doing another activity to a different activity. So let's say I want to get good at doing curls. And these are just simple activities. Obviously, I can do curls. What other activities could I do that could help, that would be a transfer training that could help me actually improve my curls? What else could I do that does similar type motions? So curls, I'm doing elbow flexion. What else has elbow flexion as far as exercise goes? Well, push-ups are going to work. Push-ups are going to work a little bit in the eccentric control, right? But pull-ups, right? Overhead press maybe a little bit. But again, you're thinking, so we want to work the biceps. We got to work the biceps. So what I'm saying is transfer training means doing something that does the same activity, but in a different motion. So if I want to work curls, if I want to get better at curls, I do curls. But I can also do something like a pull-up, right? Is that going to do the same motion? You're still going to get those lats as well, but you're doing the curl of the elbow. And depending upon your position of the hands, you can even change things that way, whether it's more bicep related or brachialis related. Or brachioradialis if you do kind of pull-ups like that. So there's all kinds of ways you can work that. Could I do rows? Palms facing you versus palm vertical versus palms down, right? Would rows help me possibly improve curls? What do you think? I'm like, yeah, right? Because I'm getting the same motions. That's the idea. So now if we talk triceps, right? So maybe I need to work my triceps. I want to improve my amount of push-ups I can do, right? And we know that if you do a true push-up, it's really more triceps and less pecs when you're closer in, right? So if I'm doing in here, a lot of that's tricep work because I've shortened my pecs. So I'm in here doing that. I want to improve it. Well, I can do tricep pull-downs. That'll improve my overall tricep function. So eventually it'll transfer over to my push-ups. I could do overhead extensions, right? So that's what transfer of training says, is that you may not do the exact activity, but pretty much the motion you're doing transfers that training over from a different activity. And then the reversibility principle we've already talked about a little bit in aerobics says that skills and strengths are transient unless training continues. What it says is use it or lose it, right? So if you don't exercise, you're going to lose that activity and the strength training you've gained. So we talked about our energy stores that already. I'm not going to go back through that. But fatigue, right? There's different types of fatigue we can experience. We can experience localized fatigue, muscle fatigue, right? You ever go to the gym and you're working out and you're doing something, I don't know, maybe you're doing rows and you get that last rep and you try to pull that next rep in and your muscles just say, nope. And your arms are just killing you. You can't do another one. And maybe you go do something else. And then if you come back 5 minutes later, you may be able to go back to doing a few rows because you've allowed that muscle, that localized fatigue, to overcome itself. Cardiopulmonary fatigue is where your heart and your lung system just gets overloaded. That's a little harder to overcome. In order to overcome that, you've got to rest. Thresholds for fatigue. All of us have different thresholds for hitting our fatigue, and each threshold is different and specialized to that specific person, right? But what kind of stuff can we do to help prevent us from fatiguing as quickly? So we make our workouts more efficient and we actually get more out of our workout. What kind of stuff can we do? Chemicals, good, right? What kind of stuff can we add? We can add B vitamins, right? We can add caffeine. Caffeine helps overall, actually. Steroids, definitely, yep. Do that pre-workout mix, right? And we should get a little protein in with it, right? Get a little bit of food in our stomach so that we can have enough energy spare stores that if we burn our ATP out, we can create more quickly. Because remember, to break down fat requires, and so when you're breaking down body fat, it requires energy to create energy. That's really weird the way our bodies work that way, right? Our fat stores are kind of our last result in case, the body's worried about starving. That's why you get fat stores, right? And that, if you ever have somebody that, or ever heard of somebody that's trying to really do like that starvation diet level where they cut themselves down to like 800 or 1,000 calories, some people, when they even cut themselves down to that, they still gain weight. Well, what's happened is the body has said, oh, well, if I don't save this, I'm going to die because I am starving. So instead of using that energy, it just stores everything you put into it. And you still gain a little bit of weight. So you want to make sure that you have some energy stores for your body to work. Warm up. Another thing that could influence your fatigue. If you warm up a little bit, you're less likely to fatigue overall. Right? And then afterwards, after you exercise, a little bit of stretching for that cool down. Get some post-workout intake, right? Maybe a banana, some fruit, stuff like that to rebuild up that energy. The studies are out. Studies are all over the place on what post-workout stuff works best. Protein's usually the best options for you. because your body's burned a lot of protein. In order to rebuild, you need protein. But stuff like creatinine and phosphates and stuff like that, the studies are all over the place if it actually works. I think a lot of those post-workout, combo shakes where you get everything in it, a lot of that's psychological, I really think. Gummy bears, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just depends upon what they're, and mainly gummy bears, if you look at them, gummy bears are a lot of glucose, especially if you get something like the pure Haribo version of gummy bears and stuff like that. A lot of those are just pure glucose. They don't have a lot of high fructose corn syrup or anything in it. It's just pure straight sugar, right? Just feed those to a couple kids. Give it like a whole bucket of gummy bears to kids and see what happens. They become little balls of terror, right? Generation of muscle. Your muscle changes over your whole lifespan, right? Early childhood and pre-adolescence. Chocolate milk actually really works well. And believe it or not, chocolate milk is a great post-workout drink because you get the milk, the protein from the milk and the sugar from the chocolate. And plus, chocolate has a little bit of caffeine, so you get a kick from that as well. So it's not actually a bad post-workout drink. Back to this. When you're building up skeletal muscle, this is one of the things I dislike. I've seen a couple of those shows. Have any of you seen the shows where they have the 8-year-old bodybuilder or the 7-year-old bodybuilder that's trying to be like dad, the bodybuilder? Have you ever seen any of those? My son's a bodybuilder too, blah, blah, blah. It's not healthy for kids to do that. It's dumb. You're exactly right. Children's bodies are not made to strength train like that. It's why if you look at physical education over the years, right? If you go back to when I was in school, which was, ages ago when we were dinosaurs at school, we didn't start lifting weights until late middle school, early high school, because it just shows that our bodies aren't ready to build up that mass of strength until we start entering and getting closer to adulthood. Our bodies just aren't made that. That's why they're slow and short, right? Yeah, exactly. Kids just aren't made to bulk up like that. And then when you force them to do that, it often has long-term. Dr. McKesson. Well, yeah, there's always going to be those outliers for the minor, right? But the thing is what's going to happen to him later in life? That's the other thing, Dylan, right? Is he going to have lots of cardiac? Yeah, I know who became. He's Eric Metcalf's, I think, cousin, if I remember correctly, from way back days for the Browns and that, and also for the Falcons. But it's just so short. I'm sorry, Javen, I can't help you with that. But let's use DK Metcalf as an excellent example there, Dylan. What's going to happen when he gets over 40? What are the chances he's going to have a healthy life over 40? He may not, right? There's a good chance, especially with the fact that still for the rest of his life, there's a good chance once he gets over 40 that all those compounding issues from his genetics hit him harder than everyone else. So that's the problem with working with kids when they're young. Running endurance activities are fine with kids. That's actually okay. Getting them to run around and burn off their energy, or as my mom used to call it, go out and blow the stink off you, that's great. But doing hardcore lifting is just not something that's ideal for kids at a young age. It can really damage their muscles and their bone structures. And not only think about it, but let's say that I am making a kid do bench press who's 9 years old, right? At the end of all of my bones, what do I have open in all those kids? My growth plates, right? As I'm young, when I'm that young, my growth plates are still pretty wide. Now you add a compounding pressure to those growth plates. Could that cause problems? What do you think? Yeah, right? And may end up affecting their overall bone growth, right? Or maybe, their arms don't grow to their full length or whatever it is, or maybe their legs don't. So you got to pay attention. Once we get into adolescence, then we can start doing some strength training. Young and middle adulthood is where we kind of hit our peaks, right? That's where, we're the most virile, and we're the most athletic, we're the most energetic, we've got muscle build. And then when we get into late adulthood and moving into seniorhood, unfortunately, our muscles decline. We have this strength curve that starts off here, peaks over like young adulthood and then just, and you'll find for those of you that haven't yet, once you like, I was funny. I remember hitting 30 and thinking, oh, I'm doing okay. And then I hit 35. Ugh. Then I hit 40. Then I hit above that. And I'm finding the older and older and older and older and older I get, the more I'm seeing how much of a decline your physical activity actually takes. So it's really important. But part of that's also psychological and cognitive, right? As we get older, our brain kind of wears down too, right? I noticed that my ADHD gets worse the older I get. I was hoping it'd get better, but it's not. It's getting 10 times worse, right? And then motivation and feedback. As we get older, we just kind of we don't want to do all the hard work we did, right? We've done work for years. And the more feedback and motivation we get, the more we're going to work. All right, so we'll stop here. I'm going to stop the sharing. We'll pick up with neural adaptions on Tuesday. Stop recording. Where's my mouse?